So white chocolate warmer, but taking a step back in general, usually when we do some barrel treatments on the clean side, we're treating a couple extra barrels more than we need. And in this case, we had some really good tasting white chocolate barrels that we didn't know what to do with. So we moved them over to the pilot system just because we had it. And it's getting kind of cold outside and thought, what do we have on hand? We had some extra maple and some cinnamon, just threw them in. Ended up tasting pretty good and put it on draft. And we sold a ton of growlers of it. It was really well reviewed by you guys, both in feedback through Untapped and stuff like that. And then Patrick Roos specifically had it and loved it and said, hey, this has to go on the calendar for next year. We couldn't make it happen last year, but made it happen this year. So it's basically straight up white chocolate. The cacao rates are a little bit lower than we did for this year. But yeah, it's white chocolate with some extra cinnamon and some maple. It's so the one what's in your glass right now is just treated for this actual treatment, but what we're talking about is the 2017 white chocolate was the initial usage of this.
It's like thinking back to my bar days, like the two pilot beers that I always think of is like just disappearing through our fingers. Curiosity, the first batch of that we did was crazy how fast that sold, and then the second would be like white chocolate warmer. It was like unbelievable how many growlers of this thing. We were filling them in advance just because we had so many people that were picking up multiples per transaction. So I'm personally happy to see this one back.
Yeah, from what I understand, it's one of our quickest moving draft options since we did sour in the rye with pineapple and coconut for the first time. So, which was crazy how quickly we moved.
Is it the same maple syrup from Vermont Sticky Maple?
So part of it, yes, but we had to buy some additional ones. So there is the Vermont maple from the Vermont Sticky Maple, but there is also a little bit of New Hampshire maple syrup in it as well. Any other questions on this beer? Are you guys liking it? Yeah.
Tasty? Any maple freaks? Yeah. Join the club. Yeah. Seriously, fantastic. Keith loves it. First time he had it, he gives it the...
Keith likes it.
How do we get milk chocolate or dark chocolate out of the same cocoa nibs? If the same cocoa nibs.
I mean, they are the same nibs. As far as like what we call white chocolate, it is just a blonder beer, the white oak sap base with cacao and vanilla. We're not necessarily going for like a white chocolate flavor. We're just going for a chocolate flavor in a blonder base. I mean, white chocolate is mostly butterfat and cacao fat. So, but yeah, no, it's cacao nibs. I believe we're using Ghana source nibs in this particular one, and then vanilla. So that's where we're getting the base flavor for it. But it's nibs. It's straight up nibs that we're using. We're not using like crushed up white chocolate. We have another question over there.
What kind of vanilla was used?
We used Madagascar vanilla in this one. So
sick. That's expensive stuff.
Almost all the vanilla, unless we specify it out otherwise, most of our vanilla that we're using is coming in from Madagascar, which creates 75% of the world's supply of vanilla in general from Madagascar.
Cool. Question? Yeah. What is the format of the vanilla we're using?
So for this specific project, we used powder, which is basically pulverized vanilla beans. Take the beans and grind them into a fine powder. We use those. It really depends on on the application that we're using. If it's something that's in barrels for a long time and we have time to, we'll cut up beans and throw it in. Powder is really useful if we're doing the final treatment in a tank because we can recirculate it to get more extraction out of it. But yeah, we use powder, which is just pulverized vanilla beans or chopped vanilla beans, kind of depending on what we're trying to accomplish and what tanks we're using for it. So hopefully that answers your question.
So pulverized vanilla beans are also a lot easier to get out of a tank than like whole vanilla beans. So to Andrew's point, like it's basically where we're treating the beer is where we're gonna kind of like what we're gonna decide what beans to use, what format of beans. So
Are there flavor differences in the two types of vanilla, the pulverized or the whole bean?
Not really. The biggest difference is how quickly they extract into the beer. Powder extracts much quicker because there's much more surface area. Beans take a bit longer to extract. As far as the difference between the two, just in general, there isn't much, assuming they're the same origin.
Love it. You guys like it? You love it? Gotta have it. Cool. How long? Yeah, how long should you expect to be able to age this? Would you recommend?
I mean, I think it's tasting delicious right now. The beer's obviously going to change over time. I think the maple will go down a little bit. The booze obviously will kind of mellow into it a little bit more. The cinnamon seems to stick around more, at least the sort of tannic side of it. It might become less sharp per se. But yeah, I think it's drinking well now. It'll probably be drinking well through next year for sure, and then beyond that, it's going to be an experiment. So
yeah, let's melange one next. Sounds good. Sounds good. Cool. You guys, everyone's familiar with melange one, right? One of my favorite brewery beers ever. One of those kind of things that shows that the sum of the parts can be better. Or I mean, like shit, look how good the new Black Tuesday is. So it's kind of hard to say that with something like this. But again, one of my favorite brewery beers ever. Ages fantastic.
So I'm going to cue up the history first on it. So Melange 1 is obviously the first of the Melange series, but the first time we made it, surprisingly, was September of 2008. We were founded in 2008, and the sort of interesting thing then was we were looking for basically a beer for a party, and the first time we ever made it was a cask, just one cask, and then about 6 months later we made a little bit more draft of it, but it's a blend of obviously Black Tuesday and New Tart, but back then those beers didn't even have names. The Black Tuesday that went into that beer we just called Imperial Stout, like bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout, and it was only about 4 months old at that time. Which, if I don't know if any of you went to like the Barrel Odyssey a couple of years ago, but we did like an unbarrel aged Black Tuesday, and that beer can be very aggressive and boozy and almost barbaric early on. So the Oud Tart, which we didn't even call Oud Tart, was used to kind of temper that. And back then we called Oud Tart, like young Oud Tart, we called Gypsy Tart, which oddly enough turned into another beer after that. But yeah, it was basically a blend of barrel aged Imperial Stout and young Flemish Red, and I'll pass it on to Keith from here. But yeah, it's basically a blend to kind of add complexity from the sourness and also to tame down the alcohol.
Who just learned something? Sick. That's how it's done.
yeah, I actually did. I learned a lot from Bill. Earlier we were talking about the history of this beer, and honestly, like I think this is probably the first melange series I've ever had, and absolutely fell in love with it. I really like the Flemish Red portion of this in the base of Black Tuesday, and I really think this year's kind of highlights more of the Flemish Red into a stout base, more than past years of being Black Tuesday heavier. This year we actually did select more funkier barrels of Oud Tart. While we were blending our Oud Tart Reserve, we were also selecting barrels for this beer. And so this was actually, these Oud Tart barrels were actually part of the Oud Tart Reserve tasting session or selection, if you will. So yeah, so this is some of our best Oud Tart barrels blended with this year's Black Tuesday. And yeah, honestly, I think it's drinking fantastic right now. Really interested to see what if anything it'll do coming months. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. I really like the Oud Tart. I love Oud Tart as a base beer in general. But yeah, I think it's fantastic right now.
This one ages phenomenally well. Also,
yeah.
Ended up taking one to an event recently that had pulled one of my own ones from home. It's 7 years old and still fantastic. Stout, subdued, and you just get like this beautiful cherry fruit leather flavor to come out of that again with the barrel aged flavor. But again, it's not about barrel aged beer. It's all about this big, beautiful Flemish red. So,
yeah. So this year actually the Oud Tart. So the Oud Tart portion was actually in new to us barrels. So like new to us meaning like from wineries. So this is more of like the Oud Tart base was in fresher barrels where previous years it might have been like reused barrels because we'll reuse these wine barrels as long as that flavor still comes out really nice. We'll keep reusing those barrels. So I do think it has more of like a wine impact, a little bit more vinous and more funk than years past. But
2016 was the last one. Yeah. So the question is how do we choose when we're going to have these beers blended and available?
I mean, it kind of depends on feedback that we get from you guys as members. At points we did even distribute Melange 3. It's really kind of feedback and how long it's been since we've done it, and what we feel like doing, what we hear from you guys. As far as like making new melanges, we're kind of slowing down on that after Melange 14, 15, kind of slowing down, but it's interesting. And
so I think to that point, like we're kind of slowing down on naming it Melange, but we're still doing a ton of a different brand blending. And right, like the archetype is basically a melange. Yeah. So I mean, there's yeah, and also I think there's a little bit of like kind of selfishness where I love Melange 1. I've always have. So it's like I want to do it again. It kind of might be where it comes from. Right. So we love Melange 1.
The trick is you just
do it again.
Get right here, get on Keith's shoulder, and get in his ear.
Some of the melanges also like way back in the day were super interesting. Like, has anyone here had Melange number 2? Does anyone know what Melange number 2 is?
Bruers and on maple.
Tell us, Bill.
Brian's actually pretty close. Yeah, it was autumn maple with young, quote unquote, young lambic, which we called Cuvée June, and then was called Sour Blonde, and then became Ruse. Yeah, so yeah, we called it Yambic. There's some very weird beers in the Melange series. Then, if you don't see them in bottles, there might be a reason why, but right. They're experiments, So,
right. How does it all work? Blending. How do they work? Blending. How does it work? How do you choose the beers to?
Yeah, I mean, literally. I mean, I'll just tell you honestly. The straightforward answer is, if we're gonna do, we'll know a volume that we're trying to hit, and then we'll go through and we know basically percentages of roughly of what's in what barrel volumes. Basically, like. Anything with Black Tuesday and bourbon barrels, we know it's going to be pretty much full. There's some loss in there. It depends on if we're doing Oud Tart. So Oud Tart's basically Oud Tart with a little bit of sour blonde. So like there's percentages, and we'll taste a ton of barrels. I mean, we're going to taste, if we're looking for 20 barrels, we're going to taste 50 to 60. Yeah, for Melange 1, it's a legacy brand, so we're trying to get somewhat close to the ABV. We're trying to get somewhat close to the flavor profile that we, like I was saying again, that we all enjoy. I mean, that we know we like Melange 1, so we're not going to really mess with it any more than necessary. So yeah, it is going to fluctuate. It's going to fluctuate based off of barrel source, based off of age. I mean, it's going to fluctuate based off of a lot of things. But yes, I mean, we really just go through and we choose. So I was saying with this one, like we actually were tasting for Oud Tart Reserve, and we knew this Melange 1 was coming up. So we were actually tasting Oud Tart Reserve and putting in a pile for Oud Tart Reserve. And we were like, all right, yes, we're going to also choose for Melange 1 because we knew this was coming up. So yeah, there's a little bit of both. Like, I mean, it's mathematical, but it's also, I mean, you got to hit a volume. I mean, you can't just, we're just going to do 2 barrels, but we need 20, So, yeah. No. It's fun, honestly.
Cool, Keith. It's a mouthful on this next one.
Go for it.
Fuck.
Go for it, dude. What you got?
Fuzzy Blue, double barrels, reserve.
Double BBLs. Double BBLs reserve.
BBL.
So I think everybody kind of knows what the BBL series is all about, right? So we take Black Tuesday and Tart of Darkness. We do treatments on that. So we actually did this for the past 2 years. Before I was actually through production manager, Jeremy. Jeremy's always like, we're always going to go bigger. We're always going to go a little bit more volume. We're always going to push. We're basically like pushing up the hill, right? We're going to do more and more. So what we did is we did blue BBL 2 years ago. We did blue BBL. It's blueberries, vanilla, lactose. We took those barrels and we definitely made more volume than what was required. But Jeremy had this vision that said he knows like we're gonna push this out until like 2 years, right? So the same thing goes with the fuzzy BBL, right? So we took the fuzzy BBL, which is peaches, apricots, lactose, vanilla, and we pushed more volume so that we can then blend those two to create fuzzy blue BBL reserve. So the reserve, anything on our label that says reserve is basically double bourbon barrel aged, right? So this beer was already Black Tuesday. This is actually triple, so I don't know why it shouldn't be Grand Reserve, right? So anyway, so it gets into, well, it's Black Tuesday TOD blended, and then it gets put into barrels as blue BBL. Then it gets put into other barrels as fuzzy blue BBL. So this is actually a triple bourbon barrel aged fuzzy blue BBL reserve.
We're gonna change the price on this as soon as this is over.
Yeah,
You can get like an extra $5 on that.
That's an accountant question too. Yeah, but yeah, so we did this. We did this, and we really like the way it came out. We really like the age on it. It's definitely a sharper acidity, and I think that's from the extra time aging on the lacto. So more lacto presence, a little bit tart. So yeah,
He likes it.
I don't know. For me, this is interesting. This one has a little bit less fruit sometimes than like the two base components, blue BBLs, fuzzy BBLs. The most interesting thing for me about this flavor-wise is the wood. It's just a huge layer of complexity of the added oak bourbon, and the fact that this is 18% alcohol is pretty interesting. Haven't had too many other sour beers at 18% alcohol, so the complexity on this for me is through the roof. But it's much more, for my palate at least, it's much more barrel versus the fruit character, which on the base components, it's a little bit more fruit forward.
Yeah.
Who else but Jeremy and Keith, man?
Yeah, I mean, I think like this is more showcasing like the peach skin, apricot skin. Like it's more of like an aged fruit. I mean, if you age a fruit and then eat it, you get more of those like older flavors, earthy flavors. So.
What farms could we get the fruit?
So that fruit is sourced from. So I know it says Sunny Cow. The guy's up like Central Coast. Yeah. So it's more like a Fresno, Bakersfield. Like it's more like a central. So I'm actually not from California. So Fresno, I don't. Central Valley. Yeah. So I know it's like north of us. Yeah, but not super north. Yeah.
This one's a ripper now. Put it in cans. Yeah, right. Next one up is Cherry Chocolate Rain. This one originally was a cask, right?
Yeah, so Cherry Chocolate Rain was a cask for the Black Tuesday party, I want to say in 2010. I don't think it was in 2009. I do remember having that, and while it did get good ratings, the original cask, internally we thought it tasted like cough syrup. But we redid it a couple times and have liked it since. The big change for this year on this specific bottle, I think we've only done it once before in bottles. We've done it a couple times on draft.
375s last time.
375s. Rye whiskey on this one. So every other time we've done it, it's been bourbon, and now rye whiskey, which I think adds a little bit of spiciness, but mostly rye whiskey barrels versus bourbon barrels. To me, what they impart to the beer is the rye whiskey. It's not necessarily spicier; it's just like a drier, more oak-driven character to me. Usually, the whiskey barrels, like rye whiskey, usually gets aged a little bit less time than bourbon, so less of the oak gets stripped out into the spirit. So more of the oak is kept in the barrel. So it imparts a little bit more oak character or spiciness, a little bit leaner edge to me to the base beer. Um, Cherries, they're from Michigan. They're Montmorency tart cherries, which is what we like to use. Sometimes we use some Balaton as well, but this is just Montmorency. The cherry aromatics for me are a little bit less than the last time, but I think it goes into a better balance overall. You still get that little tart edge and that little sort of pie cherry kick on the flavor, but it's a little bit less there aromatically. Aromatically, for me, it's a lot of barrel and then a lot of the cacao nibs. So super fudgy. I think it's a really good balance, and I really dig the rye whiskey. So I think it's a good use. We were trying to figure out where we really wanted to use the rye whiskey barrels we had at Black Tuesday, and I think this was a good place to use them.
I think the can is a good place for this one.
Cans.
Also, it's wild. You guys liking the cans? Yeah. Sick. Cans are awesome.
And, I mean, to be honest, this beer will age well, but I think it's tasting really good right now. And I don't know what people's opinions are, but it seems like cans kind of entice people to drink things more quickly as like a fresher product, and you're going to get the best cacao and cherry out of this beer fresh. It's definitely going to mellow and integrate more, but you're going to get the cherry and cacao better while it's young. So I think it's a good idea to drink this beer a little bit on the fresher side. Like it'll probably be a delicious beer to age for 10 years, but if you want the most out of that cherry and the chocolate, now's the time.
Yeah. Same cacao as the white chocolate, or is this different?
Say what?
Same cacao as white chocolate?
I'm actually blanking on the origins right now. I don't think this is from. I'm almost positive this isn't from Ghana, but I can't remember if this is Honduras or Bolivian.
We just came out with a beer today, Bryce Scotty. Woo! I think you guys have heard of this one. Yeah, I was picking up these bottles.
There he is.
I was picking up the bottles earlier and
Come on down.
ended up getting one of these with it. So I think the least we could do is let the guy talk about the beer.
Happy to be here. Thank you. Oh, sure. Yeah, so this is Bryce Scotty was originally born about 2 years ago as a test batch that Lee Nuger, the manager over at the brewery location, and I were kind of in an evil genius mood, continually experimenting with more and more of our beers. And this was an afternoon that we were back in the offices just talking about beers that we wanted to get weird with, as Lee would say. And I had just started home roasting at the time, and was interested in getting my coffee into the beers of the brewery. And we just were chit chatting. He said, "What about like a biscotti idea one? Would you want to contribute some coffee to that?" And we looked at what ingredients we had on hand, and it was like, "Oh, we got some almonds and we got some chocolate." And he said, "Do you have any coffee on hand that you'd want to throw in there?" And at the time, I had a natural process Costa Rican coffee that I brought in, and we put into a test batch, and it went really well. Got pretty high ratings on Untapped. I think it was at like a 4.2 something.
It's a 5 to me.
Is it? Oh, thanks, Randy. Anyways, fast forward about 18 months. They had employees put forward beers that they would like to see in production for the 2019 calendar year, and I put in Bryce Scotty because I wanted to see it go into full production, and apparently enough people also, seconded it. And so yeah, I got some good news in February, or actually no, late last year. Andrew Stretch, sent me an email and said, "Hey, we're going to do a full production of Bryce Scotty," and I was over the moon. And so I was just, I started thinking then. That was almost a year ago. I started thinking about what kind of coffee I would put into it, and about 2 months ago, I started tasting coffee, started cupping coffee with my friends over at Bodie Leaf that I buy my green coffee from, and went through about 5 or 6 different cuppings of coffees from Brazil, Indonesia, Costa Rica, Burundi, and landed on this Guatemalan Asodiet. It has it's probably the easiest drinking coffee I've ever had. It's really rich in flavor, but doesn't linger. Has a really clean aftertaste, and it's just a very classic Central American coffee profile. A lot of chocolate up front, and then some just really mild lemon acidity at the end that kind of cleans out the cup. And when I first tasted it, I was like, "Oh, this would be probably really good in Bryce Scotty," because when we had tasted it early on in August or September, it was pretty roasty, and I wanted a coffee to complement the chocolate that was going to go into it and to help add more body into the beer and to then complement any roastiness from the almonds as well. And I'm really, really, really happy with how it came out. I think it tastes as good, if not better, than the original batch. And it's just a big day for me, just to finally get one of my coffees into a full production beer for the members that have been, the members have been such big fans of my coffee from the very beginning. Right when I started roasting, Barry was one of the first people to buy my coffee, and I just I've been really blessed by the members here that have really pushed me in this little side project that I have. So I have bags if anybody wants one. Come see me afterwards. It's a really good coffee. So I don't know.
It's a really good dude, by the way. Also, thanks, buddy. If you haven't tried the beer, try it. Yeah, question. What's up?
Yeah, it was an infusion. Yeah, it was originally a Randall infusion. And if anyone's curious to the base was Chronology Imperial Porter, and we internally we love that beer. I remember actually, the whole series, but that Chronology Imperial Porter, I just remember last time Corey King was out here from Side Project. No, second to last time he was out here. We had Chronology 24 in the bright tank, and he tasted that, and he's like, "Dude, this is my jam right here. Like, this is exactly what he wants." I'm like, "Oh yeah, Corey King. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's cool. He likes this beer." So it was a really good excuse, like, to rebrew it. We knew we wanted to do Bryce Scotty, and we didn't have any other real use for that base, but we ended up brewing a good amount more of that Imperial Porter, so we have a little bit of extra to play around with in the future for next year's membership. So.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of that whole series. The Chronology series in general, they were always really good. The Old Ale, the Wee Heavy, but when we rolled around to the Porter, I remember tasting the 6, which is not a long time to spend in a barrel. Like 6 months is not a long time, and to already pull so much flavor out of a 6-month barrel aged beer. I think we all knew right when we tasted the 6 that the 12, the 18, and the 24 were just going to be bonkers, and that turned out to be the case. So I was really happy to have that as a base for this beer, and I think the flavors really complement the base and then go really well with the other ingredients, with the almonds and the cacao nibs. So.
Oh, I guess I do have an interesting story about the Chronology Imperial Porter base. So we knew it was the fourth one?
Third one.
We knew we wanted to do another Chronology series, and we knew we wanted Imperial Porter. So we brewed a bunch of pilots for it, and we were tasting through the pilots for it, and a couple of them were really, really good, much more like low roast, Englishy malt base. And at the time we were working on We're working on this beer with Urge Gastropub Rest for their anniversary party that was like sort of a Firestone anniversary concept of brewing a bunch of different base beers and then blending them. And we were tasting we did this beer called like Heavy Roast Imperial Stout. And we were tasting through that with the pilots for the Chronology Imperial Porter. And Patrick just said, like, that's the one. We're going to use the roasty Imperial Stout base as the Imperial Porter for Chronology. So that kind of goes to show that that style is in the eye of the beholder between Stout and Imperial Porter. But that's the interesting thing. So the roasty Imperial Stout became the Imperial Porter that is Chronology Imperial Porter. So thought I'd throw that one out there.
Oh, what were the difference between the two beans used for the original versus for this version?
Yeah, so I think if my memory serves me correctly, the original one that went in the Randall was a natural process Costa Rican, which I like and I don't like natural process coffees. Natural process coffees tend to be just really complex drinking coffees with real heavy like herbal, dried fruit, fermented fruit kind of flavors that are really good in themselves, but I don't know how well they go in beers. And so I think it was a bit risky in the first. I was still new to home roasting, and so I just went for it, and it turned out really well. But I knew the second time around that I would probably lean towards a wash process coffee and something from Central America that would be just how do I put this? It would be a much more naturally flavored coffee that wouldn't have those really crazy kind of mind-blowing flavors that you get in natural processed coffees. So wash processed coffees tend to just be real middle of the road, easy drinking. They have basic kind of flavors of chocolate and roastiness and acidity and maybe some fruitiness to it, but nothing as complex as the natural process that when they dry the beans and lay them out in the drying mats at the processing plant and wherever the coffee is grown, the sun just bakes the coffee cherry into the actual bean. And that's what gives it those real mind-blowing flavors, which I love. I'm like natural processed Ethiopians are, some of them just taste like straight blueberry pie. And they're great to drink. But again, for this beer specifically, I wanted something that was a bit more basic. So this one is wash process, so it still is dried, but it spends more time fermenting in water, and then they lay it out, or they put it into a drying cycle as opposed to laying it out in the sun.
Grab a bag. Recommend it. Cool. Any other questions for Bryce? Oh, round of applause for the old boy. Thanks, buddy.
Beer Bara. So this is a collab we've been doing for the last, 6-ish plus years with Third Window out of Santa Barbara. We trade off brewing it or blending it every single year, depending on what it is. It is a winter sort of. So Beer Bara in general is like a winter celebration, mostly in Mediterranean and Arab countries. And they make these desserts that are usually heavy into fruit, either grapes or raisins with spices. And so every year we kind of riff off that. This is the first time we've ever bottled it. I think Third Window's bottled one of theirs once before, but it changes every year. So the beer that you have in front of you, this year's Beer Bara, I think we're calling it 5.0.
5.0, yeah.
It's anniversary based, so our anniversary based beer, aged in bourbon barrels. It has a ton of Syrah grapes, of which most we do not allow to re-ferment, so that's where all the sugar's coming from. And then it has cinnamon and fennel in it. And it's very much a barrel-aged winter warmer beer. A lot of sweetness, a little bit of acidity, really nice complex spice notes. I'm not a huge person who likes these sweet, spicy beers, but I actually love the way that this came out. I love that I can taste fennel, like fennel seed in the beer, which I think is probably one of my favorite like dried spices. Um, and I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's a pretty cool beer. It's really young. I think we packaged it last week, so it's still in its kind of awkward, needs to meld phase, but I'm really happy with it. Say what?
The anniversary.
Yeah. I mean, most of it would have been the same barrels that we would have used to blend for that, but I think most of the anniversary barrels, yeah, we're about 2.5 years in barrel from brew date.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like so reminiscent of like mulled wine. It's like perfect for the holidays. And yeah, again, like that big, like caramelly raisiny, like toffee anniversary beer just complements it so perfectly.